Hello, welcome back to YCFT. This week, we're not talking about one film in particular, but more an array of films over the space of a decade.
A topic,
A topic.
if you will.
We haven't done a topic in a while,
No, we have not.
and we thought after doing 3 Texas Chainsaw films in a row, considering one of them kickstarted a whole new genre, essentially,
It did.
we thought it makes sense to lead into this. So we are talking about reboots.
Yes.
And I have notes.
He does, you know.
It's like the second time I've ever brought notes to one of these.
I have nothing.
So, for a
Take
film
us
to
away.
be a reboot, it should be resetting a chronology that's been established over multiple films. A remake is concerned with updating a single film. So, for example, The Ring in 2002 is a remake, because that was a remake of obviously the Japanese film. The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, is a remake of The Thing from Another World, or Thing from Another Planet, I think it's called. Whereas Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003, that is actually heralded, obviously we don't know all films, but it's often heralded as the first reboot. So it is resetting a whole chronology. Sequels and remakes have been happening for decades. They were very, very common, but very rarely were films going back and resetting their own chronology, especially for long-established franchises. So technically, 2003's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the first. Like we said in our last video, it did very well on a budget of like 9-point-something million. It made $107.4 million at the box office.
Yeah, it did very
So,
well.
A lot of production companies, including Platinum Dunes who made that, thought, oh, we've got something here.
There's a formula to
Should we do this? And that film directly led to I say directly, it influenced the creation of the Saw franchise.
Yeah.
And Hostel. So Saw came in 2004. Because the film was very violent and when we hadn't seen violence like that in a film, it started this whole new genre. Basically, the torture porn.
The torture porn
kind of
era.
came from Texas Chainsaw. And with the Saw franchise then also going on to be really popular because that had even less of a budget than that did.
Yeah.
Also, following a year later, in 2004, we had Zack Snyder's... It's hard to say if this is a remake or a reboot because the Dead franchise, they're very loosely linked.
Yeah.
But I'm going to include it anyway because it's important. It's Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead.
So it is a remake of Dawn of the Dead, but they're all loosely linked, so it is kind of resetting a chronology because it goes back to the outbreak. Difficult to say, but I think it's important because that went on to make $102.3 million. So 2 films in 2 years that did very, very well. So the only reboot to come out in 2005 was The Fog.
Which
Fog. Again, at the time, debated whether it's a remake or a reboot, but it only made $46.2 million.
Yeah, it
didn't do very well.
Not a great remake. It isn't.
It's not.
I do possess it on DVD, but it's not a patch on the original.
Yeah, but over the next few years when you really see, because obviously Dawn of the Dead must have been in production around the same time as the Texas Chainsaw. I think it had been in production hell for a while. Yeah. And it was very, very different. Zack Snyder has a very particular style that we all know today, but at the time it was very new. And it's a great film. I actually really like I'm going to call it the reimagining of Dawn of the Dead.
The reimagining, yeah.
So in 2006 is when it all kind of kicks off, because obviously it's a couple of years after it. It's like, all right, we can do this. So we had reboots galore. We had Black Christmas or Black Xmas 2006, which only made 21.5.
Which we will do a video on.
We will do a video on this Christmas because...
There's stuff to say.
I've never seen it, but after watching the most recent one, people are now looking on this one really fondly.
Can it be worse?
We had The Hills Have Eyes, which made 70 million. That did really well. And
that's a decent film.
That is I'd say that's a really good imagining of it.
Yeah, some people do prefer that to the original, which is very rare.
Yeah. I'd have to rewatch the original again. But yeah, we also had The Wicker Man, which didn't do as well. This one had a budget of 40 million and only made 38.8.
Nick Cage couldn't save that movie.
Nick Cage couldn't save that movie again. It's hard to talk about reboots without having remakes in there as well, because they're all kind of...
sure.
The lines between them are very blurred, but he created an endless meme of the bees, like, that's priceless. And that is a deleted scene as well. That's not in the main cut of the film.
The gift that keeps on giving.
The gift that keeps on giving. And we also had The Omen.
Oh, yeah, we did.
And When a Stranger Calls.
I love When a Stranger Calls.
So we had five big ones right there in 1 year.
That was a strong year.
Okay, if I've missed any...
Yeah, chime away.
Chime away. We had The Hitcher in 2007.
Haven't seen that.
It's okay.
Okay. I couldn't even tell you a thing about it, to be honest.
It's just okay. Big one we had was Rob Zombie's Halloween. Directly happening as a result of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And that film did really well. Heavily,
yeah. Say what you like about it.
It's different.
But the film is different enough, and it did rake in a lot of dollars.
It raked in a lot of money, and it's divided fans to this day. There's
Ever
stuff
since.
to love about it, there's stuff to hate about it. That film is both extremely similar and extremely different to the original Halloween. It's
Yeah.
But that film can directly be linked back to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes.
And then it went on to make a lot of money.
Quite
So that's
a lot
followed
of
by-
money. And you know what? People still talk about it.
People still talk about it. It got a sequel
Yeah.
that didn't do as well.
It didn't do very well.
Same
No,
Texas Chainsaw
but
Massacre.
you know
I got
what?
a prequel.
Rob
Didn't
Zombie,
do as
you
well.
got people talking. So
You got people talking, and it's by far the worst in the franchise. Yeah, the year later, 2008, we had Prom Night and April Fool's Day. I have never seen those. 2009, it was a big year because we had Friday the 13th,
we did.
which had a budget of 19 million, made 92.7, so that did really well.
Very good film.
Again, also very debated on how good it is.
I personally really like it.
We personally really enjoyed that one.
I think it's
That
a
is a
strong entry.
massive one. They're starting to hit the big franchises here. Yeah, My Bloody Valentine, which we've done a video on in the past. We know that one did really well.
Strong year for the Supernatural boys.
Yeah, It's Alive, Last House on the Left.
Don't like either. Just
Hard
because of the
films.
subject matter.
Hard film. So the reboot era is in full
It's in full swing. Yeah, seems
is
like
in
it.
full swing. But 2010 is where things start to go a bit awry.
Because
I'm going to start with the two small films that came out that year. I'll say
Okay.
small. We had The Wolfman.
I like The Wolfman.
I really liked The Wolfman.
It's not, amazing. But
It had
it's a good
the
film.
same issue that a film the year later had, in which they had a lot of practical effects that they CG'd over the top of.
For no
For
particular
no
reason.
particular reason, but I actually could do quite.
I do.
I Spit on Your Grave. But the big film of 2010, which did really well, before I say it was, it had a budget of 35 million, so the biggest budget of all the ones we've talked about so far. And it made 117.7, so it did really well. It's become quite infamous. It's A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yep.
So you look at the numbers, that film did really, really well.
Yep, financially.
They had planned, they'd already got Jackie Earle Haley, who played Freddy in that film, in talks to talk about doing a sequel. But never happened because people hated this
Yeah,
film.
that's not an...
It is a very fine film. I can watch it and enjoy it. But people have looked at why this film, who was really successful, is also classed as a bit of a failure. And when you look at the previous films, big horror franchises that were rebooted and did well, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th, Halloween, silent killers. It doesn't really matter who you have behind the mask, behind the chainsaw, the machete,
No.
the knife. Saying that, when we were rewatching the Halloween films, we discovered it kind of does matter who does the movements of Michael. Jason, there's many great interpretations of Jason.
Of course there are.
At this point, only one person had played Freddy Krueger, and it was Robert Englund. And he brought such a persona. And now they're trying to remake a film and replacing that persona with a new character. Jackie Earle Haley does a great job, and I think he's a really interesting take on the character. The effects on him look really good. They actually toned it down because initially they had it look more like a burn victim.
Oh.
Really interesting CG on the side of his face to try and take a
Yeah,
chunk
the
out.
holes. Yeah.
The problem is they went really different with Freddy's approach, more creepy, more pervy. But then the interesting side of the story where they talk about, oh, maybe he actually didn't do what they said he did and that's why they killed him. They kind of abandoned that entirely. It's like you added interesting idea that you didn't really pick up on. But people weren't ready to accept someone who wasn't Robert as Freddy. And it'd been a long time. It'd been 7 years since Robert Englund had suited up.
7 years?
Yeah, 2003.
Oh, because of
Freddy
versus Jason. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So it'd been a while, but people just weren't willing to accept someone else. It also has issues of a lot of the film is very safe. There's a lot of shots of what you're going to have references, but a lot of the shots are just exactly the same as they were in the original film.
Yeah.
Like direct callbacks. So it's by no means a bad film, but it tried to follow the same formula as the other reboots and it didn't work purely because of Freddy.
With the films that were preceding that, especially, like leading up to 2010, how many supernatural films did we have in that list?
A couple.
A couple, but not too many. Ultimately, they are just like mainstream slashes. Yeah. Do you think that was also a reason, potentially, why Nightmare failed? Is that people had kind of got used to this tried and tested thing of, supernatural entities and horror? Was it just not a thing anymore? Was it too unbelievable for people to reignite a demon killer?
No,
a nightmare
personally,
demon?
I don't think that's the issue. I think when I look back at these and what they brought to the franchise, the big ones, Texas Chainsaw showed us the violence that our brains thought it had seen in the original one.
Yeah.
We talked about there's actually not a lot of violence in the film.
Yeah.
Not a lot of blood. That one gave us all that violence that we thought we'd seen.
Yeah.
Like a brain. Halloween gave us a deeper look into the psychology of Michael.
Yeah.
Friday the 13th turned Jason into more of a predator.
Yes.
A territorial predator. And again, gave him a bit more depth. They brought changes to the characters.
Yes.
Good changes in a lot of ways. Different takes on the characters. The problem with Nightmare on Elm Street was they tried to play it safe, but changed one of the core aspects that people loved about the franchise, which was Freddy.
Which was Freddy himself.
And I said, Jackie Earle Haley, he does his best, and I do not think that's a bad performance in any way. I think if they're going to change things up, they needed to go like really far out.
Radically different.
Radically different. Like changing Freddy, but not the core story.
Yeah. I also have issues with the 2010 film. Nightmare on Elm Street, it was never a particular favourite horror franchise of mine. I do enjoy the Robert Englund movies, but I would never call them favourites. The 2010 film, Jackie Earle Haley is not the issue.
No.
He is a fantastic actor. You just need to see him in anything. Like, he does a great job as Freddy.
He doesn't confirm this, but he did audition.
He did, because he was friends with Johnny Depp.
Yeah. He took Johnny Depp along with him, and Johnny Depp got the role
Yeah.
that he wanted. He's never confirmed this.
No, but that's...
He says he can't remember if he went to the audition.
It's a very potent rumour, though. I think there's probably some strength to it.
Yeah. So yeah, by no means a bad film. Did really well.
It did.
But they said because I believe that was Platinum Dudes as well, and they said after that one they weren't going to do any more franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street.
So the 2010 entry effectively kind of ends to a point the reboot remake era.
You can see it start to die down after this, because the year later, which isn't a reboot, we had in 2011 we had The Thing, which is a prequel, which was initially meant to be a remake / reboot of the original film, but then the creators didn't want to do it. They thought they couldn't do it. They couldn't go back and remake a masterpiece. And I think there was a lot of like shakings up by how reboots had started to fade a bit. So they made a prequel instead. And that has the same issues that The Wolfman had the year beforehand, where they CG'd over the practical effects because they thought people didn't want to see the old techniques again. And when you look at behind the scenes, it looks great. So in 2012, we have Maniac and Silent Night, which is a reboot of the Silent Night, Deadly Night franchise. Which I think the issue with that one, it kind of did okay, but bear in mind, Silent Night, Deadly Night was banned in the UK. So not a lot of people actually knew about it.
So undeserved.
So undeserved. We are talking about that next Christmas.
We are.
Absolutely are. Going into 2013, setting trends again, Texas Chainsaw is the first requel.
Yeah.
Which I don't even know if that's the right term to use, because it's only recently got penned in Scream that that's like a direct sequel that...
It was a requel before there was even a term for what that
film
was effectively doing. Yeah.
They kind of realized at that point, we've done a Texas Chainsaw reboot. We can't do it again. We can't really do a sequel to that film. Right, we'll do a sequel to the original film. And that'd be a way to get fans back on board.
Yeah.
So we're following the original timeline. In the same year, we had a reboot of Carrie, which famously
we did.
wasn't very well received. But, so I'm going to say the last great reboot was Faiz Alvarez's Evil Dead.
Evil Dead.
Which I think is pretty universally agreed on to be a good film in its own right.
Yeah.
And it did pretty well.
And what year are we in?
2013.
2013.
So it's basically 10 years this era last. Because the last true reboot was 2015's Poltergeist. Which didn't do very well either.
I completely forgot they remade that.
I think technically it's a reboot because there was several Poltergeist movies.
Rebooted it, yeah.
Yeah.
Completely forgot about it.
So it's such an interesting thing. And basically Freddy, the villain that created New Line Cinema and launched a whole new... Again, there's so many films that have happened because of Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, he reinvigorated the slasher genre. Also killed the reboots.
That is, yeah.
All because of poor creative decisions on the story.
Yeah.
If you're going to change Freddy, you need to change the story to match that Freddy.
I think with Nightmare as well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong with this, but from what I remember of the film, they do also make it very explicit that Freddy's interest in the children is sexual.
Yes.
And I don't know if people had an adverse reaction to that. They preferred it being implied in the original franchise. They didn't want it spelled out for them.
If they'd gone with the plot of he was actually innocent and he's a vengeful spirit...
Which they play with.
They play with and
a
then
little bit
abandon.
in that
I
film.
actually think that could have saved this film.
Maybe.
Because then that's a different take on the character.
I do remember watching Rooney Mara in it and thinking she does not want to be in this film.
No, some great effects in that film.
She does not look like she's enjoying this experience at all.
No. So yeah, it's strange that it kind of... The reboot era started and ended with a Texas Chainsaw film.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just, a lot of these films, like, very throwaway, but also quite interesting. Like, I would go back and rewatch The Dawn of the Dead, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I rewatched the 2009 Friday the 13th quite often. I really like that take on the character.
You know,
it was like a decade of experimentation. See, can we take this old product and give it to a modern day audience with a fresh coat of paint?
Do you know what I've just learnt from you saying all of these films? That a lot of them I remember, I'm very familiar with, DVD collection. We are the era that grew up with the reboots and with the remakes.
Do you also kind of realise that these
are all the horrors?
The boundaries between what is a reboot and a remake is very blurry.
It is. But these are the films that we were raised with.
Yeah.
These films were big when we were growing up. I mean, The Ring is one of the first horror films I ever remember watching. And it probably took me a few years to realise, oh, it's not an original idea. It was based off a Japanese film.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when My Bloody Valentine came out.
It's like, I remember sneaking into the cinema to watch My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah. But
I remember because I went to see an Underworld film. I saw part of it because we watched it and then watched part of My Bloody Valentine. So I had to sneak into another one to see it. Because these all came out and I was just too young to be going to the cinema to watch them. My family weren't into horror. My dad wasn't going to take me to see these.
Oh, my mum she still is massively into horror movies.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, we grew up with ultimately unoriginal ideas.
Yeah. But after the reboot era ended, that's when the recall era started. It didn't properly kick off until Halloween in 2018.
Yeah.
Like going back. Because there was for a while, interestingly, around a similar time of Texas Chainsaw 3D in 2013, where Neil Blomkamp wanted to do a direct sequel to Aliens.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Ridley
I
Scott
remember that time.
derailed. It got as far as Sigourney Weaver was on board. It started production.
Well, they had concept art
They had
as well.
concept art. They were in pre-production, and Ridley Scott derailed it because he wanted to do Prometheus sequels. I love Prometheus.
He's
but
got a lot to answer for, that guy.
He does, because
hit and miss, Ridley Scott.
Neil Blomkamp to me is also a bit hit and miss, but that was a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
So the recall era didn't properly kick off until 2018, and we are now living through that with Texas Chainsaw Massacre having its second recall.
Yeah. It's a fascinating time of horror. I mean, I know reboots, remakes, they never truly went away, but they definitely haven't spiked as much as they did in the noughties.
Like in 2006 and 2009.
Yeah, they were strong.
Because the thing is, a lot of these had spawned other films.
Yeah.
And I said, like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre had a prequel. My brain has just given up. Hills Have Eyes had a sequel.
Yeah, which wasn't great, but it still garnered a sequel.
Yeah, obviously it spawned the Saw, Hostel. A lot of the films that we grew up with happened because of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the reboot era.
2013 is also the same year that The Conjuring was released. Now, I know The Conjuring is an original film, but I wonder if part of its success critically as well was because it was an original idea.
Perhaps.
I don't remember the climate at the time.
We'd had a decade of rehashed stories, and then suddenly we get this fresh original idea, which ironically is now been done. Plus, we hadn't had a lot of supernatural horror at that point. It went away for a bit. Well, that's why I was questioning the lack of success for Nightmare on Elm Street. I'd say it could be a little bit of that, but I think a lot of it is down to
it's Freddy.
It's Freddy.
How they portrayed Freddy.
And we have not had a Nightmare on Elm Street since, and it has been 12 years.
We have not. Even now, I don't
Warner
think the
Brothers, actually, interesting, gave up the rights to Nightmare on Elm Street. When the Craven estate went to get the rights back, they just gave them back. Because they said they wanted to concentrate on The Conjuring. They had no interest in doing another Nightmare on Elm Street film.
God.
And it currently is still...
That's kind of sad.
Now they're scared. They won't touch it.
Yeah.
Unless Robert Englund comes back.
I don't know,
He's too old at it. I think he said it would take a very special script to bring him back.
Yeah. I think that's fair as well. But it's a really interesting time in horror. But the one thing that really kind of just hit home there was, my God, all of the horrors that I remember growing up with were not original films.
No.
If you wanted originality, then you needed to be born in the 60s or something to appreciate the films that came in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
That was the time.
The 80s had an interesting time where they're like, we're just going to do as many ideas as we can.
Yeah.
Because they only ever written as singular films. They'd work out sequels later. They never set up for sequels. They'd throw enough and see they'd do enough and see what's stuck with audiences.
Yeah.
And then make a franchise on it from there.
We touched on it with Child's Play, didn't we? In that the 80s, it was sequel galore. And then in comes this fresh new idea, Child's Play, that just really took off and people loved it. Well, a lot of horror fans loved it.
You say we touched on I don't think by this point we'll have released our Chucky film, our Child's Play video. So that is coming in following weeks.
Stand by.
Stand by. So yeah, that's kind of all I found that just a really interesting... It was interesting to research and just to see... There's probably more that I've missed. Some of them, arguably, are remakes. The difference between a remake and a reboot blurs.
It blurs.
It blurs a lot.
I don't think we'll ever see as big a time span where it was do like one consistently after another again. I think that was quite unique for the noughties into the early... What do we call the 2010s?
The 2010s.
Yeah. I don't think we'll ever see that spike.
Because we still had a lot of remakes in this year as well. Because we also had the likes of like House of Wax.
Yeah, House of Wax over the 2005.
Original IPs weren't doing that well because we had the like 13 Ghosts.
Yeah.
And Ghost Ship.
My Dark Castle movies.
Dark Castle movies weren't doing that well. So original IPs during this era weren't doing that well because people were excited about the stuff that they already knew, but then they got bored of the stuff they already knew, and original IPs became popular again. It just
can't win.
Swings and roundabouts. You can't win.
The House of Wax movie is interesting because that's classed as a reboot, right? Because that is different enough from the original Vincent Price film.
I've never seen the original one.
You definitely don't have a Paris Hilton character in the Vincent Price 50s
Jared
movie.
Padalecki in that one?
I think he is, actually, yeah. I think he is. I would class that as a reboot, because it's very much its own thing. It is not a direct remake of the original film.
I think another thing that could have led to the success of Friday the 13th and My Bloody Valentine is Supernatural, the TV series, was really popular. There wasn't a lot of Supernatural-based films, but the TV show was... And obviously Jensen Ackles and Jared Padalecki starred in those two films.
Yeah.
So that could have also led to the success of them. But also, they're pretty good films.
Pretty good films.
Different enough from the originals.
Yeah.
The problem is, Nightmare on Elm Street could have been... It could have been... Even if it was a really good film, I think it would have received backlash over not having Robert Englund anyway.
Yeah.
It was kind of strangely destined to fail. Even though it
fail.
Made a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes money doesn't necessarily mean success.
When you think about the original Nightmare, it was so unique. No one had ever
Yeah.
really seen something like that before. But by the time we get to 2010, audiences' tastes have changed. We're used to certain things in horrors. And then to reintroduce something like that, I don't know if... maybe it was just the wrong time.
Maybe.
Maybe Nightmare was of its time, and it wasn't one that just translated well for a new
the franchise had ended
audience.
so well. Taking Freddy vs. Jason out of it, because that had been in the works for a long time and is different enough. The true ending of the series is Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Yeah.
Which deserves a video on its own. Its own right is a masterpiece.
In case you can't tell, David is a big fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
I am indeed. And on that note...
Yes.
Yeah. Check out some of these reboots. If I've forgotten any...
If you were, like, similar...
Just let me know.
Yeah. If you're, like, around our age as well, revisit your youth. Because, as I say, we grew up with these films. I've heard of every single one you listed there. I've seen most of them in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I now look on a lot of them a lot more fondly.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I'm quite excited because the Evil Dead that we have in this list, we got it last week and it's still in its cellophane.
Yeah.
And I cannot wait
just tear that cellophane off.
To dive back into that film again because that is a true reboot.
Yeah.
And it's great.
I mean, I just literally said before that I want us to look at The Ring in depth because that is one of the greatest remakes
of all time, yeah.
I would say so. Did very well.
So yeah, thanks for listening to me ramble about films that I like and films that have been remade. We thought this would be a bit of a change of pace, considering we've talked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's nice.
We still talked about it a fair bit. Yeah, but we're done with the chainsaw for a while.
We are. We're gonna bury it behind a wall for a bit.
Went from Friday the 13th, where Machete kills, the Driller killer, and then a lot of chainsaw. So we might need to move away. Well, maybe it's time for some more Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, maybe.
We've been watching a lot of violent stuff recently.
Yeah, I know. Give ourselves a little break.
Yeah. Until next time.